The more time I spend in this hobby, the harder it gets to impress me. I can count on one hand the products that have stayed with me over the years. The original Naim Uniti Atom integrated amplifier is one of them. It's just one of those pieces that was more than just gear. It represented how I wanted to live with and experience music, beyond specs and measurements. By the time we reviewed the Atom in 2020, it was already 3 years old, and it still felt more forward-thinking than most higher-end hi-fi components. Hell, I could argue it still is. The Atom was a compact Class AB integrated with Wi-Fi, streaming, app control, a DAC, and HDMI. And that was back when hi-fi was still trying to pretend that HDMI wasn't a thing. It was beautiful. It was a joy to use, articulate without sounding sterile, slightly warm yet able to control woofers better than some amps with 2 to 3 times its modest 40 watts. I used it every chance I could, finding excuses to connect it for nearly every loudspeaker review we did those first few years. But its limited power and customization options sometimes forced me to set it aside. After nearly 2 years as a reference, I eventually moved on because, as a reviewer, the Atom wasn't the long-term solution I needed, even if, as a music lover, it remains one of my favorite all-time amplifiers. Naim has several products that carry the Uniti name, but earlier this year, I came across something I hadn't seen before, the CI-Uniti 102. I know the name doesn't exactly roll off the tongue like Uniti Atom, but the product itself just immediately caught my attention. Now, unlike the Uniti Nova or Nova PE, which share much of the Atom's design language, the 102 looked completely different, even more stripped down, but just as elegant. The 102 shares much of what I loved about the Atom. Wi-Fi, built-in streaming, Naim's easy-to-use app, a built-in DAC, and HDMI with eARC support. But it adds more power, deeper customization, and somehow costs roughly half as much, which is very un-Naim-like. Setting up the 102 in a traditional hi-fi system is just as easy as setting up the original Atom, though the 102 is clearly the more installer-minded product, hence the CI in the name. It ditches the Atom's color display and physical controls, leaving power as the only manual button. Everything else happens through either the Naim app, the Focal Naim Manager, your TV remote, or a control system like Crestron or Control4. Let's talk power. Naim rates the 102 at 150 watts into 8 ohms and 260 watts into 4. After my initial test with the Sabrina V, a loudspeaker that can dip as low as 2 ohms, I reached out to Naim and learned that while they don't list it, the 102 remains stable down to 2 ohms, where the output rises to 480 watts. So yeah, calling the 102 more powerful than the Atom would be an understatement. I had no reservations connecting it to any of my reference loudspeakers, including our SVS Titans, the Wilsons, and the Harbeth 30.3s we have in for review. Addressing the Class AB elephant in the room, the 102 is not built like the Atom. It is a Class D amp based around the well-known TI TPA 3255 chipset. But unlike a lot of cheaper amps using the same basic platform, Naim runs theirs in a parallel bridged mode with a custom 1.2 kilowatt switch mode power supply. This is why it doesn't cry uncle when pushed by difficult speakers like the Sabrina V. And for a sub $2,000 amp with a name badge on the front, that's kind of insane. Amps built around the TI platform, they often scream Class D. The 102 sounds more like the Class AB Atom than some ultra-clean, sterile, measurements-first Class D amp. Take the Eversolo Play, for example. Yes, the Play is cheaper and more consumer-friendly, but sonically, the Naim is just in a whole other league and far more powerful. The 102 drove the full-range Sabrinas at spirited to just downright loud levels in our 450 square foot listening room. I easily hit sustained levels of 90 dB with peaks over 100. Aside from getting, a little warm to the touch, the Naim never sounded strained. Now, swapping the Sabrinas for the Titans or even the Harbeths, the amp was even more effortless and its case temperature dropped accordingly. But what I really love about this amp is its tone. It has loads of power, but it never sounds abrupt or overly grippy, the way some high-powered amps can, like older Krell designs or even the new musical Fidelity. The name sounds natural no matter what speaker it's driving, with a consistent level of clarity and quality from one loudspeaker to the next. The top end was especially revealing. Naim does a brilliant job controlling, maybe even softening, the highest registers so they never tip into the brittle or sterile qualities sometimes associated with Class D amps. Now the 102, it may not hit with the same iron-fisted bass punch and recoil as something like the $20,000 D'Agostino Pendulum or even the more approachable musical Fidelity, but the difference was way smaller than I expected. Even on the Sabrina's 8-inch woofer, the Naim delivered excellent low bass control. Energetic techno and the iconic drum break from Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight sounded awesome and completely lifelike. I may have underestimated the Naim's sense of scale too. Like the Atom, the 102 doesn't look like a big, beefy amplifier that can take things to 11. For an amp you can easily hide, it can drive loudspeakers to true-to-life scale with excellent dynamic snap. Yes, the costlier AB amps like the Pendulum, they do have a slight edge when it comes to absolute headroom and agility, but that gap is just not as wide as you might expect. Compared to a more price-comparable Class D amp like the Marantz Model M1, the Naim gave me more power, more control, and a better experience with the Wilsons. It even started to feel a little Bang & Olufsen-like, which was game-changing for me. One of the reasons I am a B&O customer is that their products let me turn the gear side of my brain and frankly this hobby off. I get that the Sabrinas are not powered speakers, but because the Naim can be hidden from view and controlled without a direct line of sight, the Wilsons almost felt active in the way I interacted with them. For the first time since getting my BioLab 50s, I did not rush to reinstall them as soon as a review was over. And that's huge for me. If you caught our ECLA review, I said B&O should start looking over its shoulder because Focal Naim is gaining ground when it comes to the luxury user experience. The 102 is just more proof of this. Getting back to the Marantz, now one notable difference is that the M1 is Dirac compatible, whereas the Naim is not. Now adding full bandwidth Dirac brings the price of the Marantz to $1,249. Focal and Naim's Manager software, now that lets you access bass management, multi-band PEQ, custom settings for your speakers and subwoofers with purpose-built settings designed specifically for Focal loudspeakers. Now, it's not as plug-and-play as maybe Dirac, but it also won't cost you anything. If you or your installer know your way around Room EQ Wizard, the 102 can be manually tuned in similar ways, which I loved. This is where the Naim really stands apart from the Atom and why, of all the HiFi products that I've tested so far this year, I keep coming back to it. It lets me keep, one foot in traditional HiFi while giving me the kind of control, customization, and living space friendliness I usually associate with more active systems. And when it's time to take my reviewer hat off, that matters. Now, would I have liked to see a few more input options, like a built-in phono preamp? As an advocate for you, the viewer, yes, but for me, I didn't miss it because in this kind of living room system, my Alva TT can connect to the Naim over Bluetooth and still sound great with way less hassle. So no, the missing phono preamp, it's not a deal breaker for me, nor is the 102's limited physical digital input selection of optical and just HDMI. I get that some will want coaxial, USB, or both, but honestly, and this is just my opinion, I think we've become a bit source crazy, definitely a little DAC obsessed. For what the 102 is and how I believe it is positioned, I think Naim has its priorities straight when it comes to the I/O. But if you can't live without all of the latest features in inputs and even similar power, at least on paper, the Marantz Model M1 or WiiM Amp Ultra, two amps we've tested and continue to own and advocate for, are going to save you money. I have nothing bad to say about either, and I'm not going to sugarcoat things in favor of the Naim. If you have more mass market, easier to drive speakers whose impedance doesn't dip much, if at all, below 4 ohms, the benefits of Naim's internal amplifier structure and power supply may not be as meaningful to you as they are to me. And if you're more of a DIYer who doesn't care about higher level control or distributed audio, the Marantz and WiiM makes sense, maybe even more sense. But hear me out real quick. If you're looking for a more curated experience, one you can dial in once and then walk away, knowing it will reliably work day in and day out on virtually any speaker, the 102 makes a lot of sense. No incessant need for updates to fix quirks because you, the customer, are effectively beta testing products before they're ready. No weird Wi-Fi or network hiccups. No device that family members or guests can accidentally screw up because they just start hitting buttons all of a sudden. If that kind of system appeals to you as much as it does me, I think the 102 may be tailor-made. But before you click buy now, one thing I know will give some of you pause. I know it did when I mentioned this in our Bose review. The 102 does not come with a remote, and I get it. For some people, that will be a deal breaker. In my experience, this was a nothing burger. I controlled the amp's basic functions with my TV remote, and when I wanted to get deeper control, that's when I used the Naim amp. And if you want to get real fancy, you can hand things off to a third-party control system like Crestron or Control4. On the bright side, you can get connected without immediately creating an account, though Naim recommends one for certain services and support. This was a lot of fun for me. I got to relive my love for the Atom, but honestly, I've come to appreciate the 102 even more. Compared to the Atom's $3,800 MSRP, the CI-Uniti 102 is a bargain. It has all the traits, much of the sound that I love from the Atom, but there's just so much more flexibility, customization, and power. And in the realm of lifestyle-friendly luxury hi-fi, I think the 102 may be the new entry point.